Thank you, Member. North Vancouver, Lonsdale.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Thank you, and congratulations on your new post. It's very lovely to see you up there. I want to begin my response to BC Budget 2019 by acknowledging a few of the people that have brought me to where I am today. In particular, I'd like to acknowledge my family and my partner. I think all of us in this House, we know that being an MLA requires a lot of personal sacrifice. We all have families that we leave every week and then go home to only to maybe spend less time engaging with them and more time working at home as well. And I know that it can be hard for a lot of the MLAs and a lot of the members here. I'm sure it's very difficult for all the members, actually. My partner has been incredibly supportive this entire time. But I also know that being away from loved ones for a long time, having your loved one work constantly, perhaps not take care of their health very well, and neglect every aspect of their personal life in order to serve the community can be difficult. And I want to acknowledge all of the partners and all the families that support all of the members here in this House. I also want to say thank you to my wonderful constituency assistants. I have two full-time constituency assistants, Mr. Mac McCorkindale and Mr. Sean Vouliez, as well as two temporary constituency assistants who joined me in my office during the summer last year, Mr. Nicholas Bragg and Miss Julia Belinsky. They do incredible work for the community, and I'm so proud of the service that they provide, the patients that they bring, the patients, the love, the compassion, and passion that they bring to their work each and every day. I want to thank my volunteers, of course. I dare not name them all, as I may leave some of them behind, but I am blessed with dozens of dedicated, committed, passionate volunteers who love people and love this province. And finally, I want to acknowledge and thank all of my colleagues who have worked so hard over the last 19 months since we formed government, and as well my colleagues from the other side of the House. In particular, my colleague from West Vancouver Sea to Sky, West Vancouver Capilano, and North Vancouver Seymour. We may sit on opposite sides of the House, but I know the passion that they all bring to their work, and we're all working together in order to support the North Shore and advocate for the North Shore. So I want to acknowledge their good work as well. So in a lot of conversations that I hear in the House, and especially when we bring up, or whenever we talk about budgets, throne speeches, I often hear members alluding to what they call the dark 90s, the 90s, remember the 90s. And I thought that I would take this opportunity to actually speak to that a bit, because I do remember the 90s. I mean, I was a child at the time, but I do remember them, and I do remember that it existed. And it's interesting because what I remember of the 90s is that my family lived in a house with a yard and a driveway and a garage. Some of those terms are difficult to, a lot of younger people these days won't know what a driveway is and a garage. And sometimes when I see people posting photos about shoveling snow from their driveway, my question's often, what's a driveway? But in the 90s, we did live in a house with a yard and a driveway and a garage. We lived in a family-oriented neighborhood where my sister and I would play street hockey with the neighborhood kids in the cul-de-sac. My parents worked very hard on a startup company together, and we weren't rolling in it, but they could still afford to send me to kung fu lessons. And I benefited from piano lessons and swimming lessons and gymnastics. In the 90s, I went to a high school in the Vancouver East Side that was considered a very troubled school in the Lower Mainland that served a lower income part of the city. But I still remember having lots of access to teachers and lots of access to teaching assistants. I remember free before and after school programs and special programs for faster learners and gradual learners and flexible learners. I remember teachers who weren't so overworked that they couldn't keep their head up after the classes ended for the day, which meant that they were able to have lots of energy to volunteer after school and support students. Now, I'll be the first to admit that as a teenager growing up in the Vancouver East Side in the 90s, I will probably not be the best personal source of information when it comes to judging the economy. And oftentimes, when people refer to the dark ages of the 90s, especially those on the other side, they talk about how it was terrible from an economic perspective. So I've done a little bit of research, and I'll turn to the Business Council of British Columbia, who released a study in 2013 that was entitled A Decade-by-Decade Review of British Columbia's Economic Performance. And it took a look at the 90s, where the NDP was in government, the 80s, where social credit government was in, social credit party was in government, and then the first decade of the 2000s, where the BC Liberals were in government. And some of the findings surprised me because I had heard so much rhetoric about how terrible the economy was supposed to have been back in the 90s. And according to this study, a decade-by-decade review of British Columbia's economic performance by the Business Council of British Columbia in 2013, the NDP government of all 3 decades, so of the social credit government, of the NDP government, and of the BC Liberal government, the NDP actually led out of those 3 decades in GDP growth, in job creation, and in export. So 3 out of 5 of the major indicators of how an economy is doing. So that was quite surprising to me. Now, when I heard about well, it's particularly surprising because it flies completely in the face of all the negative rhetoric that we often hear from members opposite about what happened back then. Now, I was originally very proud to hear the Minister of Finance talk about how BC is an economic leader in Canada and has been and is expected to continue to be under the BC NDP government. She explained that BC has the strongest economy in the country, with the highest projected real GDP growth, lowest employment rate, and biggest wage gains nationwide. And I was so proud to hear this incredible accomplishment by our government. And now, based on my study, or based on what I've learned from this study back in 2013, it turns out it's really just business as usual. The NDP government does produce good economic results. So I'm very pleased to be able to have that continue. Now, going back to my experience in the 90s, I mean, eventually we weren't in the 90s anymore. As the years passed, we entered the early 2000s and the government switched over and we had a BC Liberal government. And what I noticed is post-secondary tuition started to rapidly climb. Colleges were turned into universities without additional funding. I saw seniors grapple with rising MSP premiums. I started to watch as my friends struggled to care for their young children, as tuition fees were added onto adult basic education that carried their hopes of a better life further away from them. This is what I saw after a prosperous 90s. In the early 2000s, I was seeing all of this happen before my eyes. And then I watched as contracts started to get ripped up. It was with the teachers. It happened with the healthcare workers. I watched as funding started to stall or get cut on critical social services. And each time, the most vulnerable suffered the most. It was the children who were left without adequate support in the classrooms. It was the seniors waiting alone in their rooms for a bath once weekly, if they were lucky. It was the families and people on income and disability assistance who wouldn't see an increase in over a decade. And as I watched as time went on, I found myself watching housing fly out of reach of the average person. I watched as people lost hope of ever finding stable housing again, of rental housing, let alone owning a home. And I watched as speculators bought up condos and sat on them empty, like piggy banks in the sky. And then, of course, the headlines came about the Wild West of campaign financing here in BC. Rules, if you can call them that, so loose that you could practically buy an election here in BC from overseas and it'd be legal. ICBC, turned out, ICBC's in a dumpster fire. And what's worse, there's evidence that the previous government hid the truth from the public about just how bad it was. And then money laundering entered the headlines, showing that money laundering had been running so rampant in the province that everybody in the world seemed to know about it except British Columbians. And then we had whistleblowers coming forward, claiming how the previous BC Liberal government actually knew about it all and did less than nothing. In fact, that they may have actively been thwarting attempts to address it. Now we hear about sweetheart deals worth $16 billion with political campaign donors to purchase power British Columbians don't need for money that it's not worth. So when we're talking about supporting the people of BC, about lifting them up, about making life more affordable, improving the services people count on, and creating good, sustainable jobs, we have to recognize that the road to doing this has been fraught with the demons left behind from the past. And that's what makes the last 19 months that this government has existed so remarkable. That in spite of the traps left behind by the former government, we've still been able to make so much incredible progress on so many files. So BC Budget 2019 builds on the good work of BC Budget 2018 and continues our commitment on housing, childcare, and more. So far, in addition to provincial-wide programs, North Vancouver has already benefited a great deal from the new government's investments. North Vancouver has seen new schools announced. Hansworth Secondary School was recently announced to be receiving, or rather, Hansworth Secondary School will be receiving a total rebuild, fully funded by the province. People compared this experience positively in contrast to the fight the community underwent to replace Argyle Secondary, which took years under the BC Liberals. Mountainside was also given, students at Mountainside were also given good news. They will receive a full seismic upgrade. And what's remarkable about that announcement is that the announcement came, the funding commitment to seismically upgrade Mountainside came within 6 months of a confirmed engineer's report confirming that they did need seismic upgrading. So the time lapse between the confirmation of a need and the confirmation of funding to address that need was incredibly short. Norgate Elementary School also received a new playground. And what I understand is throughout the province, between BC Budget 2018 and BC Budget 2019, we have new classrooms for 5,500 students underway already. Housing is another area that the North Shore has benefited substantially from. I remember when advocates from Hollyburn Family Services first approached me with a conundrum that they had been dealing with for many years. Hollyburn Family Services operates a youth safe house on the North Shore that had not ever received stable provincial funding. And they'd been operating for over 10 years. And for a variety of reasons, they were coming up short in the current year. And they came to me for help. And I was so incredibly grateful and proud to have been able to work with the Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing to be able to provide them with that stable funding for the first time in a decade. Youth in the North Shore now, well, they had a safe place to go before, but they'll continue to have a safe place to go moving forward, in part because of the incredible commitment that our government made to support what is undoubtedly one of the most important services that is offered on the North Shore by Hollyburn Family Services. Not that they don't have other also very critical services. Recently, or rather a few months ago, the Premier of the province, joined with the Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing, also announced 4,902 new affordable mixed income rentals. And again, this isn't just funding announced, but rather units confirmed. From what I understand, that announcement was actually the single largest number of affordable housing units ever confirmed in one go. And 100, why, yes, that's right, it is excellent. And it is. My tone is kind of moderate here, but it was incredibly exciting. And 196 of those units of very affordable housing will be built right there on the North Shore. The Kiwanis North Shore Housing Society has received $10.6 million towards a 106-unit, 6-story seniors housing project on Whiteley Court. And the Sanford Housing Society and Hollyburn Family Services have also been granted $9 million for a 90-unit family-oriented project adjacent to Phibbs Exchange. And family units are so incredibly important on the North Shore because families don't do very well in studio and one-bedroom units, of which there tend to be more of. So 2-bedroom, 3-bedroom units for families they're very difficult to find, and these additional 90 units will be life-changing, just absolutely life-changing. Now, I know that oftentimes when people think about affordable housing projects, they think, oh, well, they're probably $1,600 a month for a 1-bedroom unit or $2,200 a month for a 2-bedroom unit. Who in their right mind really thinks of that as affordable? And actually, it's important to emphasize that these projects that we have funded through BC Housing, the 196 units of very affordable housing for the North Shore, are very affordable. Each project is expected to meet certain affordability requirements. So BC Housing has set a requirement that 30% of all the units in the building be rented out at below market, that 50% be rented out at rent geared to income, through rent geared to income. So that means that the more money a family makes or the less money they make, the more or less they pay for housing, which is incredibly affordable. And 20% of all these units will be will be deep subsidy units. So therefore, people on income assistance. That means that some of these units could be going for as low as $375 a month. And I don't know that you can. I don't think that you can rent a tent site for that much.
Maybe a doghouse.
My colleague here says maybe you might be able to rent a doghouse for that much. But instead, because of the funding offered by this government, we're able to offer people and families beautiful new units that they can live in and have and prosper in for that amount. It's really quite remarkable. And of course, in addition to the supply side measures, we are tackling speculation and vacant homes through the speculation and vacancy tax. Children and families, I think, are a huge winner in this. Let me say again, I think that BC Budget 2019 really benefits children and families with children. It's not only on the childcare front. I mean, on the childcare front, we've done an incredible amount of work in a short period of time. In BC Budget 2018, $1 billion was committed to improving childcare in this province over 3 years. And what the Minister of State for Minister of State for Childcare has done with 2018-2019's money in 1 year has been absolutely remarkable. She's introduced the childcare fee reduction program that allows childcare operators to reduce their childcare fees by up to $350 per month per child. She's introduced the affordable childcare benefit, which allows for families to apply to receive a subsidy of up to $1,250 per month per child for family, and it's income tested. There are programs to improve wages for early childhood educators. There are programs to invest and build more new childcare spaces. The North Shore alone has already received funding to create 200 new childcare spots. We were also benefactors of the $200 per month childcare pilot program, which is effectively a $10 per day childcare pilot program. So we actually we were able to convert a North Shore neighborhood house run childcare facility in the North Shore into a $10 a day childcare pilot facility. I was also given the absolutely incredible honor of being able to tell some of these families that they were going to be paying a maximum of $200 per month per child. And I remember in particular one mother who was there with her two 4-year-old twin boys. And I had gone up to her and I sat her down and I told her the good news. And I remember the look on her face. She looked at me as though I was trying to punk her. I remember she kind of looked at me and said, "Is this a joke?" Like, kind of looking around, like, "Are there cameras here? Like, what are you really saying?" And it took her a while to really grasp the gravity of what it was that I was saying, that for her two boys each, for the equivalent of full-time care, she would pay no more than $200 per month. And when she finally came to grasp of what it was that I was telling her, she was absolutely floored. And I mean literally floored, as in like she curled up into a ball and fell off the bench and laid on the ground. And her sons went up to her really worried about their mother on the ground. And I was also quite worried as well. And I asked her, like, "Ma'am, are you okay?" And she said, "Yes, this is the most incredible day. And I just cannot stop thinking about all of the opportunities that I can now give my children that I could not afford before." And she broke down into tears. And for the next 20 minutes, just couldn't lift her head. She had her head in her hands, and with happy tears just streaming down her face. In addition to all of this incredible work that's already been done on the childcare front, BC Budget 2019 also introduces a new program, which I am also quite floored by. It's called the BC Child Opportunities Benefit. And at first, it's easy for a lot of people to look at a new social program and imagine, well, that's probably not going to impact me. I probably make too much money for it. Those kinds of programs usually max out at a very, very low family income. But the BC Child Opportunities Benefit is different. So what it does is it gives cash back to families in the form of a monthly check. And it provides family support of up to $1,600 for one child for every year. So $1,600 per year for one child, $2,600 per year for two children, $3,400 per year for three children, $4,200 per year for four children, and an additional $800 after that. So up to that amount every year until the child is 18 years old. There is a current program that currently provides, I believe, families $55 per month per child, which is less than 2.5. This new BC Child Opportunities Benefit is worth more than about almost 2.5 times what the current program is worth. And the current program only goes until the child is 6 years old, whereas this program goes until the child is 18 years old. Now, the maximum benefit is paid out for families who make a combined family income of $25,000 or less. But the benefit continues onward until it eventually phases out. And for one child, that phasing out point for a family is a net family income of $97,500 per year. Net income. So that's after-tax income. And I really need to emphasize this because that is very different from gross income. $97,500 per year gross income might not sound a lot, but if you take into account that it's actually net income, it actually becomes much more substantial. The phasing out point for two children is $114,500 per year. For three children, it's $131,000 per year. And for four children, it's just under, I think it's about $148,000 per year. So families making $148,000 per year net income after taxes can still receive benefits from the BC Child Opportunities benefit if they're a family with 4 more children. And again, that is actually quite a remarkably high phasing out point for a social program. It's almost $150,000 after net income. I I don't want to guess how much taxes people pay in order to net 150,000, but it's a lot more than 150,000. Yeah, I'm really quite impressed that we were able to get that into this budget, and I know that this will help families immeasurably, absolutely immeasurably. The final piece that I want to chat about today is around the student loan interest elimination, because it's been getting, not only has it been getting a lot of media attention, but because I've been hearing about it so much from my constituents. I've been hearing about it so much from not only students who are currently in university and post-secondary education, but former students who have recently graduated, even former students who have already paid off their loans, and I'm also hearing it from high school students. A lot of people are very excited about this change, about the elimination of interest off student loans. Now, it is important to note a few caveats. First off, the elimination of interest on student loans begins effective, I believe it was February 19th of 2019, the day of the budget speech. It does not impact interest that was applied to those student loans in years previous. Unfortunately, the change only impacts student loans moving forward. It doesn't impact the past. And it's a really good reminder that elections do matter. This entire budget is a reminder that elections do matter, that different governments make different choices, and these are the kinds of choices that governments can make. The second point that needs to be stated is that only BC student loans are affected. So that means that if you have a federal, provincial, combined student loan, only the BC component is impacted. The federal component may continue to rack up interest. We're unable to impact that. And finally, it's also important to note that we're only talking about government loans here. So government student loans. So if a student has a line of credit with a private bank, then that may not they may not see a benefit from this change. All in all, a lot of great stuff here in this budget. And I must admit, I've forgotten entirely what time I started speaking, so I have no idea how long I've been going, but I'm very comfortable in saying emphatically that I'm hearing that I have 2 minutes left, but the light did not go on. But I will take that as an opportunity for me to say thank you so much for everyone in this House, both government members, third-party members, but also official opposition members, for all of the work that you do in order to improve lives for all of BC, in order to help us create the best budget that our government is able to put forward. And I'll be looking forward very much to voting in favor of BC Budget 2019. Thank you.